if you're able to stay in that more calm state as you're going through your workday, as you're doing more and more daily tasks, you don't have to shift into that sympathetic dominant state as frequently. You don't have to spend as much time there. You can reserve it for when you really truly need it. And therefore, when you go to the well, so to speak, for those stress hormones that energize you, the well won't be dry. There will be plenty there when you need it because you haven't used it all up by tapping into it all day long.
I'm Garrett Salpeter, and I believe that the most powerful and transformative way to help people recover from pain and injury, heal from trauma, and reach their highest levels of fitness and performance is to focus on the nervous system.
Hello, NeuFit Nation. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is resilience and the autonomic nervous system. So resilience and the autonomic nervous system are so important for overall health, for energy, vitality, for performance, for recovery. I mean, just this is the thing that underlies almost everything else. And it's a huge piece to the recovery and performance puzzles, and something that I think is worth us diving in here. So a little primer first. First of all, autonomic nervous system, we got to make sure we're on the same page. There's two sides to it. There's the sympathetic or fight or flight side. Doesn't mean that you feel sympathy, the sympathetic, fight or flight. And then parasympathetic, also known as the rest and digest. And these are in some ways oppositional to each other. Like for instance, one increases the heart rate and one generally decreases the heart rate. One increases the blood pressure, one decreases the blood pressure. One mobilizes energy, sends blood away from the digestive organs and out to the muscles in order to send fuel to the muscles to fight or flee, run away, or to be able to do physical work. And then the other one takes the blood and sends it back to the digestive organs to process food, eliminate waste, the reproductive organs, for those longer term growth and repair projects about rebuilding the body or even building the next generation. And with the reproductive organs, of course, is a bad joke. So the sympathetic nervous system you can also think of as work mode. Parasympathetic nervous system you can think of as recovery mode. And there's definitely you want some sympathetic, some fight or flight activity when you go to work out, or you have to energize yourself in order to meet a challenge. It could be a cognitive challenge, could be a physical challenge. So you want to be able to have those resources available to you to fuel you and perk you up and give you the energy and resources to meet a challenge. The problem happens if you stay in that state for too long. If after your workout you're then inundated with emails, or you have this fight with someone on your team or a family member, and then you're stressed out because you're 15 minutes late to something else and you get cut off in traffic, and if you have all these things happening and you're constantly in that fight or flight state, that's where the long-term problems happen with chronic disease. The most common issues for which people take medication are blood pressure issues, heartburn, so digestive issues, constipation, and those are all regulated by the autonomic nervous system. And all of those issues are problems that stem from not spending enough time in that rest and digest parasympathetic dominant state. And so it's vitally important that we do that. It's not just that we want to sit around and rest all the time. We'll talk about that as well, because we actually want to make sure we get enough work, enough input when we are challenging ourselves, so that the brain understands that now it is time to shift into recovery mode. You have to actually, like when people are working out, for example, a lot of times we think that, I did this thing, and so all of a sudden I'm going to get this big boost in my recovery and my health, and that's not always the case. Sometimes the way that people train, for example, is not beneficial. Sometimes, the same activity, just like running. If someone runs and they're upright, they could be jogging, they could be doing sprint intervals. If they're if they're, typically jogging will be the best example here, because the same activity, if someone's doing it standing erect, breathing through their nose, can have very profoundly positive health benefits. But if that same person is kind of slouching because they're so fatigued they can't hold themselves up and they start panting through their mouth, then they're actually getting the opposite signal. Instead of promoting health, they're basically training themselves to get better at being in that stressed out fight or flight state. And they can actually increase their stress hormones, can wreak havoc on their blood sugar. All these different problems can happen based on how they're training. So the same activity can have profoundly different effects based on the impact that it has on the autonomic nervous system. Oftentimes also training is not necessarily challenging enough. It doesn't actually get the point, the brain doesn't get the point, doesn't trip the alarm, so to speak, to actually trigger that transition into the parasympathetic dominant state. And so that's another thing. The training, you want to be breathing through your nose, you want to be doing all these things. We'll talk later about the resilience and the concept of these different thresholds between the parts of the nervous system. So we'll talk more about breathing there. This is more of a little bit of a different point. If you think about the person who goes to the health club and is on the stationary bike and just kind of going so lightly that they can read a magazine or something, not really focused, and they go maybe do a little bit of light weights, but they're really watching the TV the whole time. They never even make themselves breathe hard, or they're never breaking a sweat, never having to really work or focus on what they're doing. That, although that is better than being sedentary, it may not be enough for the brain to get the point that something happened, that it's time to shift into parasympathetic dominant mode, that it's time to, the contrast that is after you work hard, then the brain understands, oh my gosh, there's an energy deficit, and the brain will actually shift into this mode, and one of the things it'll do is make you feel hungry so that you take in nutrients and raw materials that you can then digest and absorb and use to replenish the energy that's been depleted, to rebuild the muscles and structures that were challenged, and to come back stronger to better handle that challenge next time. So the training the input has to be significant enough to actually shift, and sometimes that's part of the problem, is that there's never enough input to cause a significant enough shift into that parasympathetic dominant mode.
If you're ready to supercharge your practice, listen to this. Garrett and Team NeuFit have just released a new online course entitled Introduction to the NeuFit Method. In this detailed 8-hour course, you'll gain mastery of the fundamental techniques in our practice, including muscle testing and activations, nerve glides, and joint articulations. You'll also get introduced to our patented direct current stimulation device, the Newbie, an incredible machine that's empowered professionals just like you to help their patients heal, adapt, and grow faster than they ever thought possible. To learn more, go to www.neu.fit/learn. And now back to the show.
So let's talk about another angle of this, and that's the transition threshold, or the kind of day-to-day mode of operating. And what I mean by that is, we talked earlier about how it can be a problem if you spend too much time in that fight or flight state. You want to be able to shift back into the rest and digest state frequently enough to be able to actually recover and replenish and restore. And there is a problem there if we're in that state for that sympathetic fight or flight state for too long. And so one of the biggest gifts that you can give someone or give to yourself is to increase your resilience. And one measure of that resilience is to look at how much you can do in day-to-day life while still staying in that parasympathetic dominant rest or digest state without having to shift into sympathetic sympathetic fight or flight state. So if you're able to stay in that more calm state as you're going through your workday, as you're doing more and more daily tasks, you don't have to shift into that sympathetic dominant state as frequently. You don't have to spend as much time there. You can reserve it for when you really truly need it, and therefore when you go to the well, so to speak, for those stress hormones that energize you, the well won't be dry. There will be plenty there when you need it because you haven't used it all up by tapping into it all day long. And there's several ways to increase resilience and increase the threshold to give yourself the opportunity to do more and more and more things while still staying in that parasympathetic dominant state. And that is where some intention and some intelligence comes in, and where one of the things that we emphasize where we have a really, really incredible opportunity to impact our patients and clients. And so one of the keys to this is to use nose breathing during, I'll say, virtually all of your activities. I mean, unless you're literally running for your life and you need to breathe in through your mouth to get a little bit more extra air in. I mean, that's okay. But even when you're challenging yourself, generally, I'm going to strongly encourage you to try nose breathing. And as you do this more and more, you'll increase how much you can do while still being able to breathe in and out through your nose. And in the process, you will actually build your resilience. Because if you're able to do a level of work that before, running this speed or lifting this amount of weight or doing this activity for this amount of time, if that would have caused you to breathe in through your mouth, that literally means that you're starting to panic. You're going into a fight or flight state, and with the exception of swimming. Swimming is the one thing where you have to breathe in through your mouth because of the activity, and that is one of the downsides of swimming. So if you like it, just do it during your activity, but do nose breathing whenever you're on dry land. A little bit of an aside there. But this notion of being able to challenge yourself to take an activity where you previously, at that level of challenge, you previously would have started panicking and breathing in through your mouth, if you can start to do that activity, that same level, while breathing in and out through your nose, that tells us that you literally have made yourself more resilient because you can handle more and more input, more challenge, more stress without having to actually shift into that fight or flight state. And so now when if you're a working professional who also has a family and you go through your workday, there's kind of two ways to do it. The panting, huffing, and puffing through your mouth way is going to leave you in this very stressed out state. So when you go home, your spouse or child might come and ask you something or say something to you, and you might snap at them even though you don't want to. You certainly don't intend to alienate your family members, but because you're stuck in that you're so far over into that stressed out state of the nervous system, it's almost automatic. It's like you don't have as much control over it. In contrast, if you're able to build up resilience by doing something as simple as nose breathing during progressively more intense activity, now you'll be able to get through that same workday, same activities, same stresses and challenges, but when you get home, because you won't be in that stressed out fight or flight state, you'll now be better able to engage with your spouse or your children, less likely to snap at them or have a short temper, and much more likely to have rewarding, gratifying, loving, productive relationships with your family members. And so there's so many elements where this notion of being able to increase resilience actually can make us, not only better athletes or more effective physically, but also it can help us cognitively, it can help us relationally, it can help us in so many aspects of our lives. And there's another one that's one of my favorite examples for kind of a thought experiment to think about here, and that again about increasing this resilience or the level of stress and challenge. And that's, if you think about an athlete, think about a basketball player who's taking a free throw in Game 7 of the finals, who has a chance to tie and then win the game. Or you think about a golfer who's putting on the 18th green at the Masters, the biggest golf tournament of the year. And that's an input that even if that act isn't as challenging physically, it's certainly, a very potentially high stress situation, and one that someone could start to go into that stressed out panic fight or flight state, and that can be very problematic because different parts of the brain are going to act up that are going to increase stiffness in the muscles, that are going to reduce effective coordination of the muscles, and that's going to cause someone to miss the putt or miss that free throw. Whereas if you've built up that resilience and you are in this situation and you're better able to breathe through it, to stay calm, you're able to keep everything in a more optimal state, and you're much more likely to sink that putt or that free throw or whatever the high stakes thing is. So the one thing that I want to close with is, we're talking about resilience. There is, in case you're wondering, well, how do I know if I'm resilient? How can I measure it? There's a great way to measure it, and that's heart rate variability. So there's multiple different tracking tools that you can use out there. We like the BioStrap, we like the Aura Ring, we like different things that you can use, and those give you a very specific numerical measurement as to how effectively you're dealing with the current levels of stress and challenge, which tells you also how much bandwidth you have to take on more stress and challenge. And so that'll be another episode we can dive into that. But basically, the heart rate variability is the way to measure your resilience or your capacity to do more based on how effectively you've been handling whatever you've been dealing with in the recent past. So autonomic nervous system, we got the two sides. We need to, there's value in both sides. We just have to make sure that we spend an appropriate amount of time and do the right things to get ourselves into whichever side is most relevant for the situation. When we want to work, we want to be able to access those stress hormones, but when we want to go through our daily tasks, when we want to be able to recover, we have to make sure we shift into that parasympathetic dominant state. Good way to do that is nose breathing at all times, particularly during exercise, because that allows you to build resilience. And then heart rate variability, great tool to track, to monitor resilience over time. Thank you so much for listening. Catch you on the next episode.
Thank you so much for listening to the Undercurrent podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date as we release future episodes.